Have you ever made up your mind to get back to the gym or start working out again, maybe lift some weights? You picked up a light set of dumbbells, you got outside for a walk, or you just followed a short workout video, maybe 5, 10 minutes, only to end up in a massive pain flare up? You tried to listen to your body. You scaled way back from what you used to do. You did everything right. And yet your lower back seized up. Your neck stiffened, or your knees or shoulders began to throb. You felt sabotaged. You were probably confused and maybe even a little scared about what this means for your future, if you can even admit that. Look, if you've ever sat on the edge of your bed feeling defeated and wondering why your body can't or won't cooperate, today's episode is written specifically for you because the problem is not your muscles, it's not your joints. And my friend, it is certainly not your willpower. The problem is that your brain is relying on some faulty programming. The good news is that you can reprogram your brain and that there is a decades-old system built exactly for this. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Somatic Strength Collective. I'm your host, Mandy Ryle, certified strength and conditioning specialist, pain care coach, and nervous system educator. This is a dedicated, compassionate space for midlife women who can hold up the sky, but feel like their bodies are falling apart. Together, we bridge clinical pain neuroscience, somatic movement education, and bone-building strength. Chronic pain is not your destiny. Let's build a robust, reliable body and replace pain with peace. Let's begin. Well, welcome back to the Somatic Strength Collective. If you listened to our premiere episode in this new podcast launch, you know our big foundational truth. Your body is not broken. Your nervous system has simply become hypervigilant. It's operating like an oversensitive security system, right, that interprets safe, everyday sensations and movements as high-level threats. Now, knowing that intellectually is probably deeply relieving, and it certainly is an important first step toward healing. But when you are living in a midlife body, you're juggling a career and your family and all these crazy hormonal shifts, and let's face it, decades probably of chronic overfunctioning, that intellectual relief that you may be feeling only goes so far, right? And maybe you're already questioning, like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like, what am I supposed to do about it? So what I'm telling you here in this episode is that the next step is to embody this learning. It needs to shift from something that you know or that makes sense to something that you actually have experience with in your body, in your cells. And for this, I use a movement system that is designed for exactly that. So if you're a woman in midlife and you have a persistent pain issue, the messaging that you need to maintain muscle mass in midlife, you need to lift weights for bone density, resistance training is non-negotiable as we age. Probably all of that messaging is just causing you more anxiety. It's not that you don't know that you should strength train or walk, for cardio or do stretching for mobility and stress relief. Of course, you know this. Hello, you'd have to be living under a rock, right? And you've probably genuinely tried to do these things, but flaring up all the time is not an option for you, right? There's only so many times that you're going to put yourself through that before you say, I cannot be an effective human if I'm flaring up all the time. And so guess what? All of those things that you know you have to do, that you're getting all this messaging about all the time, they had to go. And it's so disheartening. And it kind of maybe makes you feel trapped, right? If you're like most of my clients, you've probably begun to resent your body. You may even have some anger toward it. So I want to pause right here and give you a new perspective, one that is going to be far, far more helpful for you, one that's going to get you past all this business. Your body is not uncooperative. If anything, it's confused. And to understand why your body reacts with pain when you try to challenge yourself, we need to look at how your brain thinks about, plans, and experiences and executes movement. We have to talk about your brain's internal GPS, what neuroscientists call the somatosensory cortex, or we can think of it as your body map. I've been a teacher of movement for my entire adult life. Let's call that 30 years, okay? And so I understand that everybody learns differently. Some people learn by listening, some people learn by doing, some people by reading, but almost everybody benefits from having some embodied component of learning. So let's start here. If you place your hands on the part of your head where you would wear a headband, you'll be in the general vicinity of the somatosensory cortex. What is this thing? It's a high resolution map, basically, of your entire physical self. Some of you may be familiar with the homunculus. This is another way of talking about the somatosensory cortex. So in this cortex, there's a specific region dedicated to, for example, your right big toe, to your left thumb, your lower back, your hips, your neck, your lips, your eyes, your genitals, right? Every part of you has its own little place on this map. And research way back from the 1950s shows that if some neurologists went and they kind of poked these areas, that people felt sensations specifically in the parts of their body that were represented in the brain in these areas. Okay? So that's how this map came to be. Now, when your nervous system is calm and healthy, this map is like the old maps that we used to have in our glove compartments. It's crisp. It's clear. This map is updated in real time, so it's more like the Google map that we now have on our phones, right? So it's a very factual representation of the body. So every time, you bend your elbow or you wiggle your toes, millions of sensory receptors called proprioceptors send high-speed signals up to the brain and say, here's where the shoulder is, here's how fast it's moving, and it's completely safe. And because the brain has a clear, high-definition picture of the body, it feels secure. It lets you move freely. But this is the information that you're really needing to hear today. What happens when you've been in pain for months or years even? Or maybe when you've spent decades sitting at a desk, like so many of us. And while you're sitting at this desk, you're clenching your shoulders from stress. Or you're ignoring all of these subtle body signals that are saying that you need to take a break. You've learned how to overfunction to keep your world together, right? So what happens in that case, which is where a lot of us are finding ourselves today? Two things happen to that internal GPS map. We're going to call it sensory amnesia. Sensory amnesia. So the brain literally starts to lose this crisp, instantly updatable communication with muscles that haven't been moved for a while, or maybe have been moving differently, or maybe really locked up and guarded, or maybe it's just been a long time since you've actually paid attention to these muscles, which makes sense, right? You were sitting at a desk, you were earning a living, you were raising your children, you're taking care of every little thing in your world. And so it makes sense that you kind of ignored your body for a long time. You almost had to. So Thomas Hanna, he's one of the pioneers of somatic movement, coined this term sensory amnesia. And basically it means that the brain forgets how to efficiently control and release certain muscle groups because it hasn't received high quality sensory input from them in a long time. So let's say that you have some places in your body that will not let go. Maybe it's your lower back, or maybe it's your neck or your jaw. Maybe it's about this part of the brain which controls the muscles, which senses the muscles, which plans movement, which executes movement. Maybe it is this part of you that needs some rehabilitation. And so, like, all of that stretching and stretching and stretching and massage and mobility work that you've been doing for very, very little benefit, maybe the reason it's not working is because it hasn't actually gotten to the area that actually needs your help, the somatosensory cortex, okay? And then the other thing that happens is something that we think of as smudging in neuroscience. So when an area of the body experiences chronic pain or immobility, the distinct boundaries on this brain's internal map begin to blur. So the actual structures of the brain are very durable and remain intact and perfect. But the way the brain is processing that information starts to blur. Here's a way of thinking about this that's working well for my clients right now. Think of that map that you used to have in your glove compartment, and you have it out in the rain, and it gets all blurred. So instead of a crisp, clear line representing your lower back and hips, for example, the brain is receiving a hazy, garbled signal from this map. The features of the map are no longer distinct, or maybe they don't exist, or at the very least, they haven't been updated in a very, very long time. So basically, the brain's functional connectivity to movement, to sensing movement, to executing movement, its attentional allocation, its motor planning, its proprioceptive acuity, all of that has changed within these structures. So let's remember the brain is receiving clear physical data from the body, right? Your body doesn't decide which data to send, it just sends the data. But because of pain and threat and disuse, what's changed is how the brain processes this information and how it gates that information and acts on that data. How does this feel to you? When I work with my clients with a specific body part, my clients may feel, for example, like a hip. This hip has been hurting for a really long time, right? And when they really tune into that hip, it may feel like shrunken or smaller. Sometimes it feels like it's just in the dark. Sometimes it feels like it's disconnected from them. Maybe it feels like it's throbbing and huge. Or maybe it's like higher or in the wrong place. Or I had one client who was really paying attention to her right hip. That was where she was having all of her issues. And I just had her on her back rocking side to side. She was really perceiving her body. And she felt that every time she rocked to the right side, it felt like she should fall off a cliff. Like her whole glute didn't exist. This is a great way of embodying what we understand about this cortex and how it has become altered or blurred or smudged. When your brain used to have a perfect representation of the area, but slowly it gets blurry, important features disappear. Other areas that used to be distinct now blend together. For example, I had one client with lower back pain. And when this man walked, he didn't so much swing his legs as just like kind of tiptoe side to side. Like everything just, right? His hips, his back, his thighs, his shoulders. Instead of being like a willow tree that moves, right? He was like a piece of plywood. Everything was stuck together. And so that robust confidence that you had before of this perfect, crisp map is now replaced with guarding. So much guarding. Discoordination. Like you try to use a body part and it just doesn't cooperate. Or very frequently, areas feel weak. So many of my clients, when they start working with me, they're so embarrassed. They say, oh, my left side is so weak. I don't understand. Like it's alarming, but it isn't alarming if you understand that the somatosensory cortex has really shut this area off for your own safety. For your own safety. And so that's why it feels so weak. So let's talk about this situation that I introduced in the podcast. Let's say you're like, okay, I know I need to get back to the gym. I'm feeling really weak and kind of flabby, right? And you plan to do a workout based on a map that you used to have. That's totally reasonable, right? And let's just imagine, knowing what we know now about these body maps, how is that going to go? Your body won't cooperate. Of course it won't cooperate. You don't have the map. Your brain doesn't have a route for it. And so then you're going to feel really confused and you're probably going to feel really frustrated. And let's talk about what happens subconsciously. An extremely intelligent, sophisticated system devoted to your survival will likely deploy specific mechanisms intended to protect you. Your brain is going to try to protect you from this experience at the gym. Let's imagine for a second what it's like driving in a blizzard. Most of us avoid that at this stage of life, but what is it like to drive in a blizzard? We know why we don't want to do it, because you can't see really well, right? The snow is like all over the place, and so your visibility is really poor. Your tires aren't responding very well because it's slippery. Maybe your windshield is all icy. Predictable features of the road are obscured. It's scary, right? So your nervous system is responding to your attempt to do a lunge or a squat in this environment. What does it do? When you don't have a good map, your nervous system's primary protection mechanism is pain and stiffness. It's pain and stiffness. So that's why you have that huge flare. And the nervous system is leveraging this response because that's the most powerful way to get your attention. It's like, hey, dummy, don't ever do that again. Protect yourself. Right? And it did get your attention because you said, oh, I guess I can't go to the gym anymore. But the issue is, and why that's so deeply harmful, is that you didn't end up in pain and stiff because the exercise was bad or dangerous. You didn't end up even in pain because it injured your tissues. It actually probably didn't. The reason you ended up in pain is because your system is running on an incomplete, blurry, or false map. Imagine yourself driving in that snowstorm. How your body is going to respond to that. It's not good. There's a reason we've been avoiding it. Any entity would struggle under those circumstances. In fact, it almost seems inevitable. Of course I'm going to end up in pain. Okay, so now that we understand what's causing this experience, let's talk about how we change it. This is where somatic movement education comes in. It changes everything. And it's such an important part of my client's journey. So some of you may already be aware of somatic movement because you've been doing somatics with me on the Yin Yoga podcast for years and years, right? And so you've been doing some kind of blend of somatic movement education and yoga. And so you have that embodied experience of somatics, but let me give you like a more defined definition of it. It's not stretching. Yeah, it's not actually stretching. And it's not pushing through to get more flexible. It has nothing to do with burning calories. okay? The word somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means the body experienced from within. Here's how I kind of describe it. Like on this planet, we have probably billions of movement systems which are devoted to the physical body. You know, everything from powerlifting to soccer to ballet to taekwondo. All of these systems are about developing physical capacity through the body. But somatic movement education is movement devoted to the nervous systems, to updating these maps that we've been talking about in this podcast. That's its job, is to make that map crisp and clear and updated in real time so that you can move with confidence. So in somatic movement, we use slow, conscious micro movements to feed your brain high-resolution sensory data. I tell my clients it's like 3D printing. Have you ever watched a 3D printer do its work? And you'll see that it makes thousands of passes, each time laying down a thin layer of material to create the object. And so this is how we use movement in somatic education. We do thousands of passes, or maybe dozens, and each time we lay down new material, creating this new three-dimensional map, just like a 3D printer. And how is it different from stretching? Remember, stretching targets tissues. Somatics targets the soul of the tissue, the nervous system, the brain maps. So instead of forcing a tight muscle to lengthen, which you may now know or predict would trigger just a protective contraction reflex based on this stinky map, right? Somatic movement speaks the native language of the nervous system to stand down important mechanisms like pain and allow you to live in your body with more peace and confidence. So when you move slowly without judgment, paying close attention to the sensation of the movement rather than the outcome, you're essentially hitting refresh on your brain's internal GPS. And it starts with the acknowledgement that your nervous systems are really smart. They have been evolving for millennia. The collective wisdom of every species since a single-celled organism is inside of you, okay? So our nervous systems are doing all kinds of work behind the scenes, stuff that we'll never even need to be aware of because they're so smart and so supportive. And so our nervous systems are learning 24/7. And so when we approach movement without agenda, our conscious mind says, I know what's best. But in somatic movement, we trust the wisdom of eons. We feed the data in to the systems and allow them to build new models about your body, about your posture, about your movement. And something that's really, really important in my work is to rebuild these models of the body, recreate these maps without all of the fear and the limitation that has become just absolutely like a parasite onto these maps. Like every time I move my shoulder like that, I'm terrified. Right? So we have to confront all of these things which have been creating all this faulty data going into the map. So in somatic movement, we're de-icing that windshield. We're driving on more reliable pavement. The features of the road are becoming more and more familiar over the weeks and months that we practice. And so when you spend 5 or 10 minutes doing gentle somatic exploration, you know, maybe a lot of my clients start with pelvic tilts, or maybe we relearn how to rotate or to extend the spine, or we relearn how to have the arm overhead. Yeah. You're feeding good news to your nervous systems. And once the brain can see the map clearly again, that alarm turns off. Remember that hypervigilant alarm that we talked about in the last episode? Muscles naturally release their chronic tension. Joints gain access to effortless glide and slide. And all we had to do was finally address the source, the nervous systems, the soul of the tissues, okay? Instead of always these endless exercises we do from the PT or all of these stretches, and every influencer has another movement that you're supposed to be doing, or maybe you need this pillow. All of those are addressing the tissues and they never get to the root cause. To see what this actually looks like in real life, I want to tell you about a client I worked with remotely. So I work with clients in person. I work with them in groups. I work with them via my app, and I also work with people one-on-one remotely. Let's call her Leah. Leah's a busy mom of 3 boys. She works very long days in the healthcare industry, and she was previously very active. She used to love to hike and cycle, and she would lift weights and she would swim. But she started to develop knee pain over several years, and it stole all of it. All she had energy for was work, and she was barely getting through that. She had some surgery. She had procedures, she had shots, she went to PT, she took supplements, but mostly she stopped doing everything. She reduced her activity, which is what a lot of people do. But let's come back to that somatosensory cortex. Ceasing activity is going to smudge those areas further. And even though she stopped doing all the things that she thought were hurting her, she was still in pain, and her knees were frequently flaring. So when Leah discovered somatics, it was a real light bulb moment for her. So instead of stretching or slogging through all those PT exercises, she learned to really attune to her body. Remodeling her experience of her knees through movement, mindset, pain science education was actually super fun for her, and it was really effective. She was moving more, she was challenging herself more. And at this point, her avoidance of movement wasn't even due to actual pain, but honestly, it was fear. Remember I mentioned fear before? That's playing a big role here. And a few weeks in, she got on one of our coaching calls. We would meet weekly. And she was confused. She said, I used to think that I had chronic knee pain. But when I learned to really pay attention to the objective experience of my knees, I realized that they don't hurt. So in the somatosensory cortex, and also the other brain regions that I mentioned before, the experience of pain had really just been baked in and was even independent of the tissues themselves. And so when she really learned how to pay attention to her knees objectively, she was like, why? What? All I feel is nothing. So in our smudged model of the knees, they present a specific experience. And the recipe, let's imagine that we're making an experience of the knees. The recipe for this experience is composed of about a quarter cup of the state of the tissues. Okay? Relatively small proportion is the actual state of Leah's tissues. But there were also 2 cups of fear, 2 cups of belief, thinking that her knees, the state of her joints was so far gone, there was no way she could live without pain. That was a huge proportion of this recipe. There were 2 cups of catastrophic prediction. Okay. And all of that was feeding into the experience of the knee. So it makes sense that her brain would protect her from all of this with our most powerful protection mechanism, which is pain. So when she began to update her brain's experience of the knees, the brain learned that protection was no longer required. So this isn't miracle work. Leah had a great result. But she still flares sometimes, okay? I'm going to keep it straight with you. Of course she still flares sometimes. She's still working up to longer hikes on uneven terrain, but she's working on it. She's back to walking with friends. She's cycling. She's strength training a couple of times a week. There's still a process ahead for improving the state of the tissues themselves, and that's what she's engaged in now. And that's important, and will also continue to update the brain's model of strong, healthy, bulletproof knees. It all works together, friends. It's not separate. It's a process. So Leah's story illustrates the truth I wish I could whisper into the ear of every perimenopausal woman. The kind of strength that you desire needs to start with somatic strength, safety. If you try to build strength on top of a hypervigilant nervous system and a smudged body map, you're building a house on shifting sand. You will constantly run into flare-ups, frustration, and injury. Hopefully this helps you to understand the experience that you've been having. Hopefully you're nodding your head and you're saying, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Because when you use somatic movement to establish safety and clarity first, everything changes. Strength training no longer is a battle against your body, and it actually becomes a joyful celebration of your body. It becomes a catalyst in reinforcing a cycle of awareness, appreciation, confidence, joy, and true empowerment. You can safely load your tissues. You can build the bone density and muscle mass you need for midlife and beyond, not by fighting your nervous system, but by partnering with it. And best of all, somatic movement, guys, it doesn't require hours in a studio because we're working with neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Even 10, 15, 20 minutes of focused, mindful somatic movement a day can start redefining that body map, calming your nervous systems. And you don't need to add another grueling 60-minute item to your busy to-do list. You just need small affirmative movements of reconnection throughout your day. That's all, guys. That's all. So if today's conversation or if Leah's experience resonated with you, there's something that I really want to make sure you have. So in the show notes, you'll find a link to download a free resource I've created. It's my ebook, and it's called The Perimenopause Roadmap for Moving Beyond Pain. Here's your roadmap, right? And it's designed to help you better understand, like this podcast, what's happening inside of your body during this season of life. And inside that roadmap, I dive deeper into the why of why so many women begin experiencing persistent pain at this stage of life, why our brains can become more protective when they perceive threat or stress, and how that can sometimes lead us into an endless cycle of chasing symptoms instead of addressing what's really driving them. And most importantly, I want you to come away with a different perspective, not one that's rooted in this fear that has taken hold, but one that helps you understand that your body has been adapting. And that means it can also learn to adapt in a healthier direction. Those brain maps change to support pain. You can change them back. So if you'd like to download that free copy of my ebook, you'll find the link in the show notes. And I think it is a really helpful companion to today's episode especially, and it'll give you a deeper understanding of many of the concepts we've only just begun to explore together in the Somatic Strength podcast. So if you've enjoyed today's conversation, if you've heard something helpful, I'd also love for you to follow the podcast wherever you're listening. That way, next week's episode will be waiting for you automatically. You don't have to go looking for it. It's going to be right there, okay? It's going to pop up. You're going to get a notification because in our next episode, we're going to take this conversation one step further. We're going to explore how to begin understanding your unique experience with chronic pain and one of the biggest myths about pain and aging. Because in this case, what you don't know can hurt you, and it's my mission to empower you. So I can't wait to share it with you. As you're listening to this little outro, hit subscribe, and we'll talk next week.